Hey everyone, we are jumping on recording this podcast kind of out of the blue. We don't have a lot of preparation here because Ethan and I were having a conversation about our plans for the pod and our plans for Please DM Me. And Ethan said something that I really, really wanted to just talk about to start this conversation because what you said, Ethan, was one of the biggest lessons that I learned from last year. And what you said was, I don't think adding extra effort is going to make the pod grow any faster. And so much from last year with timstoddart.com was this realization that little wins, stacking consistent little wins on top of each other is so much more effective than, what's the analogy, like, oh, let's go, let's work really, really hard and like grinding for 2 or 3 weeks straight. It's been a great way for me to live my life and a great way for me to just build that mindset into my lifestyle. And so as soon as you said that, I thought, man, you hit it on the head, Ethan, and I wanted to hit record. So passing it to you. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, dude, I'm so glad you said it that way too, because this has been on my mind when we were doing our end of year recap. I mean, this has been on my mind for months. You said something last year that really changed the way I think about this. You said, don't be helpful, be useful, or instead of being helpful, or no, sorry, you said instead of being helpful, be valuable. And to me, what that has meant ever since then is like, you have to build leverage around the types of things you're involved in. So for me, I'm a writer, storyteller, kind of community builder. And there are certain parts of that job that are really hands-on, like writing, editing, putting newsletters together, thinking about how to grow lists, like all this kind of stuff. And then there are other parts that if you focus on them, like everything else becomes easier. So I'm thinking about audience building is a great example. If you look at somebody like, say, me versus somebody like Trung or Sahil, right? So I've got an okay reach on Twitter. If I want to get like 100,000 people to see something, I have to put in a lot of effort. And like with my existing audience, probably some paid media spend, something like that, right? There's just a lot more time and effort that goes into it because I haven't invested in building the leverage side of the equation. Whereas somebody like Sahil or Trung or other creators with much more leverage, they can say anything they want and they almost can't stop hundreds of thousands of people from seeing it. So I'm glad that you set it up that way because I've been thinking about this concept a lot, of the idea of just like focusing on where the leverage is. And yeah, man, when it comes to podcasts, I kind of think the leverage, or like, I just don't think grinding is going to grow the pod. There's another thing too that I wanted to mention, which is relatively new, but becoming important faster than almost anything else. This whole AI thing, generative AI and the abilities that have come out like over the last couple of months have put us in this situation where even if you were good at hustling, it is less important than it's ever been before.
Totally.
Because so many people can just spin up competitors to whatever it is you're doing instantaneously. And so this whole idea of like being able to understand where the leverage is and to focus on that rather than grinding, I think it's more important than it's ever been before.
As usual, I heard a Seth Godin quote recently that hit me. He was on the Rich Roll podcast. You ever listen to Rich Roll?
Yeah.
My sister turned me on to him. He's cool. He's a good interviewer too. He's got like a real cool, smooth talking style. His cadence is real cool and smooth. And so the conversation between him and Seth Godin had that dynamic. And Seth said, you have to figure out how to be more insightful than AI. And I thought that was just the perfect way. Yeah, I know, right? It's like, oh, as soon as I heard that, all of these uncertainties about what our industry is going to look like with AI totally went away. Because if there is one thing that we can say for certain that people, at least for a little while longer, are going to be better than AI at, it's insight. They might not be able to do all the perfect technical execution. I mean, probably already can, but we can see things that AI can't. And so bringing it full circle, it's the most important thing for us right now, because we have to realize that more content isn't actually that important, because there's no limit to the amount of content we could do now. Like, you could just hit enter on a keyboard and probably write a script and have an AI pumping out content for you every second of the day forever. Right. So it's our job to be more insightful, to give a personalized perspective that will hit people emotionally so that they can feel and have empathy, or not necessarily have empathy, but be able to share in the empathy that like we're all participating in together. And that, I think, is our secret. That's how I've done it with my newsletter. It's like the proudest thing I think I've ever been doing in my life, just because it was only me and it was so consistent, and it was anti what I usually do, which is fucking just grind, because I know nobody else can outwork me. And if we take that same approach with the podcast, I know that we'll win. I really know it.
I agree. I think there's also like different ways to define winning. I've been thinking a lot about this. Like, what does it really mean for this to work? Because less and less for me, I care, or more and more, I care less about reach. I've been in a really fortunate position to be surrounded by a lot of incredible content creators just through my job. And it's very clear from hanging out with them behind the scenes that having that huge reach, it definitely opens doors, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, yeah, there are certain things that are way easier, but there are other things that are a lot harder. And I think in some ways, they're the things that I care more about long-term. I'm not sure I'm willing to sacrifice them. And so I think about, like, I was thinking about this today. When you become really famous as a creator, say, in a city like Austin, it becomes a little bit difficult to go out and do things socially, not because you get mobbed or anything, but because even if you're just hanging out with a small group of people and anybody recognizes you, they all start acting differently around you. So it's almost like, and lots of people have written about this, but it made me start thinking about an interpret that Midas touch myth, and I've never thought about it through this lens before, but kind of the basic story was this guy, everything he touches turns to gold, and then ultimately that extends to, I think he turns his daughter to gold, or it's like all the people in his life that he loves, he accidentally turns into golden statues because he can't be near any of them, or because of this curse. And I think that's like an under discussed part of the creator space. It's like, how do you really define success? Is it just the number of people that you can reach? Because there really seems to be some pretty significant downsides on having that huge audience and being really well known, if you care about the interpersonal stuff, like long term, which I think everybody, like you and I both do, a lot of my friends do as well. And I think a lot of people listening to the show do, but nobody talks about that.
So then for you personally, if you've been thinking about how you define success, let's just keep it to the podcast, because that's something that you and I are both on the same level at. Like, what does that look like for you? At least the first thing that you think of.
I really like the phrase that Sean Purry uses to describe what he tries to do with MFM. So he says, I don't want to be well known. I want to be known well. And so what he means by that is, like, it doesn't really matter how many people know your name. The real benefit to something like this is that the right people know enough about what you care about to send opportunities your way that you want. And I think, again, MFM is sort of a unique case study because they are pretty big. I mean, they're doing like 3 million listens a month or something like that between the podcast and YouTube. So that's a big audience. They get recognized out in public and stuff like that. I think I like that definition, though. Like, I want the right group of people to be listening, and I want to build connections with that group. I really don't care what the reach is. It could be 10 people if it's the right 10 people, And that sounds like bullshit, though. And in some sense, it is a little bit bullshit too. Like, I struggle with this when audience building on Twitter, because I've talked about this in the past. That is how I approach my Twitter account. The reason I don't have a huge following is because I kind of judge success there based on who is in the DMs, who am I talking to? And so far I have access to the people that I want to talk to. And so I feel like Twitter's been successful, even though it's not huge. But you still feel like, oh man, I could be bigger, you know? And so there's a balancing act there of like continually reminding yourself, what are you really after? And how do you kind of shut down those voices in your head that are like, faster, bigger, like let's do this. Do you struggle with that at all? And if so, how do you kind of handle it? Because you seem so balanced, like with your personal life and work.
You think so? I mean, thank you very much. Yeah, so I'll talk through this a little bit because I've never really talked through it that much. But I made a decision pretty early on that the reason that I do this is to make money. And I don't know, it took me a little bit to be comfortable with that because I was always so insecure about money and just the way I grew up. Like I wasn't like in poverty, but we didn't know we were poor. I'll just put it that way. And then all of a sudden you get older and you're like, wait a minute, like I think I was fucking poor, But
wait, everybody gets their own bedrooms? That's the thing.
Yeah. But it's hard to talk about that because, sometimes I know that my parents listen and I never felt like I didn't have when I was a kid. Like I always felt like I had everything I needed. My parents were super cool and they were super young and like me and my sister were best friends, and so it's just a weird perspective. But as I've gotten older, I there's a couple memories in particular that always stick with me that basically give me that extra motivation to keep going when I think like, hey, you know what? I'm pretty set. I can just take a break. And the biggest one really is the scene when I would walk into my house and I would see all the envelopes on the table. And I would see my dad at the table with all the envelopes anywhere. And it was just like a signal, like, okay, I am not coming home for like 4 days. And and I can just feel so much how stressful that was for my parents. And I didn't know any of it, I just knew like, oh shit, there's envelopes on the table. I'm skateboarding for 4 days and like I'll see you when I get back. And so like, obviously, and then I had a lot of my problems with drugs and like with getting arrested and the law. And when I just made the decision to make something of my life, it was for right or wrong, if it's moral, if it's amoral, I don't really care. I just want to be financially successful. And I don't care too much about being famous. I even got a DM this morning where somebody sent me something that I tweeted and made like a visual of it because that's like the cool thing to do on Twitter. You take ideas and you make visuals of it. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh my God, like what do you care about me for? You're going to take an idea I had and create something just to show me. And so that was like a weird moment going back and forth with him. But even still, if there is a reason for balance, and here's, I think this is where it really wraps up. The reason why I think I come across as balanced is because I actually know exactly what I want. And until you know exactly what you want, I think people spend a lot of time swimming up different streams because they think, oh, this one will be like, what's over here? What's over here? What's over here? And all I want really is just to have different sources of cash flow that just pile money into my bank account, which is awkward to say because it's funny that I don't see money as like a status symbol, really. Like, I don't think I'm better than anybody or worse than anybody. Or if I see people that have more money than me, like, I don't think like, oh, I can't wait to be at that level. It's just a very personal safety, security thing for me. And so anytime I have a project like this, it's always, okay, how does this turn into like a cash flowing, relatively passive model that I can get going and then do it again. And so, yeah, that's my answer. I just feel like I know what I want. And it took me a little while to actually just be comfortable with saying like, yeah, I'm doing this so I can make money and just be cool with it.
That is interesting. As usual, well said. As from an outside perspective, I'll tell you one other thing though that makes you appear to be like above average in terms of balance with money in particular. So like money and ambition. The thing I've always noticed about you, I don't know if you feel this way about yourself, but you seem to have a very good idea of what being wealthy means to you. Like there's a couple of quotes, and I've made fun of you for this before. Like people can search your name on Twitter plus the word grateful, and it's like I'm pretty sure
Yeah, that was funny.
Tim's like the most grateful tweeter out there. But I mean that's good, right? Because what I see in you is I see you said a couple of times like I do blank, and it's part of my definition of my rich life.
Yeah.
And for people who maybe don't know you as well, like a couple of things that always stood out to me: no budget on healthy food. Like you, at least what you've said publicly is I spend as much as I want on healthy food because that is what being rich means to me. Like
Yeah.
I eat good food with my family, and like that is being rich. Or I mean, you've told me in the past that you and your wife still go to the gym every morning at 8 o'clock, or at least you were in Nashville. I'm not sure if that's carried through after the baby and everything,
We're
but
back. We took like 7 days off once we moved, but we're back. Yeah.
those are the things that I don't think people might think makes for a rich life, especially if you're in that like middle class, lower middle class station, and like if you're in that zone where you tend to have a little bit more time than money, things like that don't necessarily look like wealth. But then as soon as you step into kind of the next level, and the time goes away, and opportunities keep coming, that stuff is what you really start to appreciate. I mean, I can't tell you how impressive it is to see somebody who operates like several companies and still gets to the gym every day with their spouse for like 2 hours too. What the hell, man? So yeah, from the outside, it just seems like you have a really strong definition for like, not only am I going to stack up wealth, but here's what that actually means to me. And I'm not willing to sacrifice the day-to-day expression of that wealth for some huge amount of money in the future, right? Like I'm going to eat great today. I'm going to go to the gym today because that is what being wealthy means. And then like, yeah, maybe, you build a huge podcast and sell it someday or something like that, but it doesn't stop you from living a quote unquote rich life now. That's so hard. I don't think a lot of people, I could never appreciate how difficult that is until I found myself in this very fortunate position of just being surrounded by more opportunities than I can say yes to. There's a risk there. There's a risk there that you just say yes to a whole bunch of stuff, and then what you really want kind of disappears. So yeah, man, I admire the way you approach it. And I think you're right about the infinite leverage of like new technologies coming out and stuff. You just can't hustle your way through anymore. Well, let me caveat that. I feel like you still need to be able to hustle, but it's just not going to keep you ahead of the pack,
You have to outwork the person next to you. And I'll always believe that. Unless that person has a better tool. It's about tools.
Well, yeah, let me ask you, how do you handle that then? Because like, here's an interesting thing that nobody tells you when you're growing up is, I was thinking about this yesterday. I'm like, I'm 32, so still pretty young, but there's a whole generation behind us in the workforce right now. And they're good. They're like really good at what they do. And I was kind of laughing at myself. I'm like, nobody ever tells you that that's going to be a thing, right? Like they're like, oh, get really good at what you do, so that you can keep building your career. But I don't think anybody ever really warns you. It's like, you're going to have to stay ahead of like a younger, hungrier generation that's way better with a lot of these tools than you are. Have you ever run into that? Do you ever feel like that or no?
Yeah, but I prepared for it. Like I just got so lucky where I think a talent of mine is that I really always have my eyes open. I'm very, very observational. And I've just been like a curious kid my whole life. And when I first started Sober Nation, actually, no, when I first started Stasi, Brian Sachs, my partner, excuse me, just trying to run a business. Had no idea what we were doing, trying to figure it out. And he sent me a picture. It was like an Instagram quote. And it said, grind in your 20s, build in your 30s, chill in your 40s. And there was something about seeing that where I just knew that when I get to my 30s, I don't need the work hard skill set is actually a little bit useless. Like at that point, you should have a team. You should have like outsourced hustle. And so I got lucky, it was like right place, right time for that message to hit me. And so luckily I've had 10 years to continuously like chip away at being a little bit more prepared for that. But I have no intention of being smarter or knowing how to use AI better than some Zoomer. Like
Yeah.
no intention. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
The worst thing that people can do when they get old is think that the way that they do it is the way to do it. Where I would much rather find the kid to do it for me and just like get him on my team. How can I incentivize this person? So yeah,
I think that's the right approach.
Yeah, well, it's my approach.
Yeah.
But I also, this is why I think culture and stuff is so fascinating. I'm the son, my family is Scottish immigrants, crazy blue collar work ethic on both sides of my family, my mother and my father. Like, I don't know what to do with myself other than work hard. And I just like it. Like, nobody would ever even have to tell me to work hard. And if anybody ever said, stop working, I would be like, why? Like, I'm having so much fun. What are you talking about? What do you want me to do? Just like sit in the grass? Doesn't make any sense to me. And so the best that anybody could ever do is tie me when it comes to working. But you get to a point where that's not actually useful anymore. And so because of that, like really opportunistic idea that was planted in my head through this silly meme that Zach sent me, I've been able to slowly like replace myself.
It's funny that you mentioned this. I had this on our agenda for a couple of weeks ago, and I don't think we ended up getting to it, but I try to take a similar approach, in part because Gen Z is so impressive to me. Like a lot of the best marketers that I know are these Zoomers who just kind of came up in this digital culture, and they get it. They get it so much better. It's like they grew up with the huge forums and the online attention of social media and stuff. And they just are way more, I don't know, they're just better at understanding the vibe or the culture of those platforms. So I like just kind of chatting with them and learning how they're approaching stuff. And I got a friend who's he's young, he's about to sell his company. And he was talking to me about like what the deal looks like, the deal structure, the equity split, rev share, like the initial payout, stuff like that. And as we were talking, let me see what I actually told him. He made me rethink, like, what do you actually think your advice would be to a young person kind of getting into this game right now? When I was young, the big thing was like, get equity, go to a tech startup, get equity so that if they ever have a great exit, you're set. And I would say, I've been in tech now for like 10, 15 years, something like that. I think that's a mistake. I don't know if it was ever the right way, but it's definitely not the right way now. I think people, if I was advising somebody young now, I would encourage them to take a slightly different path, which I'll outline in a second. But the reason I think it's a problem is because so often you never see the exit. And then people get real salty over the fact that they wasted years of their youth doing a job that they hated for something that never paid off, right? So instead, I think if there's anybody who's listening to this that's like kind of getting into the space, here's what I would do. In your 20s, I would say optimize for learning and doing cool shit with people that you really enjoy being around, right? And then secondary to that, earn real money, right? Like earn real money and continue growing your earning capacity in the market by building skills that are like continually in demand. That has nothing to do with equity. For your 20s, I think that's where I would advise people go. And then by your 30s, you should start caring about equity, I think. And who knows, maybe 10 years from now, I'll look back at that and say that that's dumb. But it's similar to what you said, which is like, by the time you get to this age, the generation behind you is competitive enough that
Yeah.
you need to be building ownership in something, or else you're just going to get smoked. And like, what's the other thing? Inflation will kind of just wash you out. So by the time you get to your 30s, or after that, right? If you're listening to this, you're like 40s or 50s or something like that. I feel like that's the time when you start thinking like, oh, I should own something. And then when that's the case, own the majority of it. Don't go in for like 2% of somebody else's company. Like really own something that you're building and go all in on it. What's your take on that?
I don't know, because I see both sides to it. So Noah Kagan read a tweet that I saw about an hour ago. Actually, I can find it real quick. It basically said, well, it's on the top of my timeline. Diversification is for losers. Go all in on one thing or get a job. And I see the rationale behind that. I see the rationale behind find a company, get a piece of that company, and do that one thing for as long as it takes. I see the rationale behind this is what I'm doing, and I want to be the best at this particular thing for whatever the industry. For better or for worse, and I can only speak about my experience here. So this is just my experience. But for better or for worse, I was always a little bit too scared to do that. And probably because I saw both of my parents do that and then through no fault of their own get totally fucked over. So my dad worked at US Air. Well, he worked at the Philly airport. He was a luggage handler, like when you get on a plane and you see the people throw the suitcases. Worked there for 20 something years, worked his way up the union, and eventually became like a manager in the union. He was in charge of safety. A lot of the problems that those luggage handlers get is when the carts cling together. It is one of the more common injuries is getting their hands fucked up. And so he put together this whole entire resource about these safety manuals to keep these people from getting their hands hurt. And then 9/11 happened. And what happened? Everybody at the airlines just got totally screwed. My mother, she was an ER nurse. Man, she was such a good nurse and she loved it too. And she wasn't just an ER nurse. She was an ER nurse in North Philly. Like there's ERs and then there's fucking ERs. And my mom loved it. She thrived in it. She could handle the chaos. Like she really felt like she found her calling. And then the hospital, MCP, got torn down and they put up housing projects. And so within 1 year, like through no fault of anybody's, they did all the things they were supposed to do. They fell into the age of industrialism, where you're supposed to find a thing and you're supposed to show up on time and you're supposed to follow these procedures and you're supposed to do it by spec. You're supposed to do it the way the manual tells you to do it, and it didn't work for either of them. So again, it's not to say that one way is right or one way is wrong, but I so specifically, again, with these weird memories, I so specifically remember getting the call from my dad that he lost his job because of 9/11. And that's really how he became a full-time paramedic, because he was a volunteer paramedic and it was the only thing he could do. And I remember so specifically thinking like that is never, ever, ever going to happen to me. I don't know how, but I have to find a way to claw my way into different things so that if one dies over here, another one is over here. But what's the downside of that? Like, of course, the risk is that you do a bunch of things and end up doing nothing, And so my solution was, well, I guess really my solution was just sales, because like everybody needs money, And so it was always like, I got it. If I can just be this thing that everybody needs, that way I can force equity and I can force myself to have options depending on what I think is where the future is going, And so I've missed some and I've made some, but yeah, that's a long history of Tim's worldview and why I think the right answer, especially for younger people, where it's less and less important to be an industrial cog. I think the answer is to find something that is just so valuable and then take that hook and dig that hook into as many people as you possibly can.
That's an interesting take. And I see a lot of overlap in between that and what I was saying too. It's like when I say you should be focused on real earning power and increasing your value to the market, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
What is the skill that everybody needs? And you're right. It's like always going to be sales and copywriting, probably to some extent. And then there's like a whole bunch of tools that you layer on that, and those tools change from generation to generation. So, right now, a whole bunch of stuff that everybody wants, like in the last year, it's been TikTok, and now it's generative AI. And those weren't on anybody's radar 3 years ago, really. So to some extent, you have to be able to like learn and relearn. But there are some fundamental skills that I think never change. And those, when we talk about like learning and doing cool shit with people that you like, and then growing your value to the market, that's exactly what I'm talking about too. But then I think like I would never encourage people to over-index on equity. At least like I wouldn't even worry about it until you're through your 20s. For a few reasons, man. There's another, like, I don't really think, there are exceptions to this, but like most 20-year-olds or most people in that age bracket, myself included, don't know enough to like, you shouldn't be worried about the equity that you own yet. Right? Because even if you owned 100% of something, the likelihood that you're going to turn it into something huge is vanishingly small. Now you take 10 years or whatever, 5 years, a couple years, and you spend that time around a whole bunch of people who are doing cool stuff, where you're out of the very front edge of your industry and you're doing stuff that nobody else has tried before and you enjoy it. You're going to build the skills you need to then take equity later on and dramatically raise the likelihood that it's going to be worth something. But if you see people like, negotiating back and forth over percentage points, fractions of percentage points, it's like, dude, you're wasting your time. Go get in the ring and learn a bunch of stuff. And then, to the point of what Noah was saying, or what it sounds like he was saying, I think I agree. I don't have any particular problem with diversifying. I agree with you. I don't have any particular problem with diversifying. But I do think, and you and I have agreed on this, we talk about this as well, maybe even on the pod, when you're building those companies at any point in your life, like later on, especially, when you're focused on equity, have a good chunk of equity. Like it shouldn't be some tiny little percentage, because why do I think that? I think it's because like once you hit a point where you're skilled enough that you should be caring about equity, you're not going to want to run into the problems that come with only owning a tiny percent of somebody else's project.
Yeah.
Like if you know how to build a company, go build your own company. Don't sign on for 1% of somebody else's company. You know what I'm saying?
I do. And I would take that one step further, where if you're in your 20s, which sounds like this is kind of where I'm relating to with this podcast. I'm talking to my 20-year-old me. One of the accidental things that I got right is I decided, fuck traveling, fuck going on fancy dinners, fuck going out on the weekends and going to clubs. And here's the cruel joke that life plays on you. When you're in your 20s, you feel like you have no time. And when you're in like your 30s and your 40s, you feel like you have endless time. And it's like, it's one of those things where your dad's telling you something when you're a kid and you're like, oh, Dad, you don't understand. And he says, yeah, one day you'll understand. And the only way that you know that he's right is to like be in that position and be like, oh, like my kid isn't going to listen to me and there's nothing I can do about it. It's one of those like same things where those terrible, cruel jokes that the universe plays on you. And so like, no one's going to listen to this. And everybody's going to think that they're in their 20s. This is the time for me to go live my life and be free and whatever. Trust me, you have plenty of life to live when you're 36. And if you take those 10 years where everybody else is partying and hanging out at the beach and feeling like they want to backpack, and just for the record, I'm not against any of that stuff. I'm making two huge ends of the spectrum here, where you can live your life, you can backpack, you can enjoy yourself, but top of mind should be, I'm preparing for my future. Because if you don't do that, then you're going to turn 36 eventually. It may not feel like it, but you're going to get there. And it's way better off to skip the kegger for that night and, go to bed when you want and wake up when you want when you're 36, at least in my opinion. So that's how I would talk to that 20-year-old about what to do. It would Don't even think about any of that stuff. Just pick a direction and there's going to be a step behind you.
I lost you there for 1 second, but it came back right at the perfect time. Like pick a direction and just go.
Yeah, we'll edit that part out.
I struggle with this too. Well, that struggle is not the right word, but I do go back and forth on this because I had a different experience. So I, right out of high school, really for the most part started working for myself and backpacking a lot, and I did not make a lot of money. Like for years, I was the kid who was constant boomerang kid, would go off and start something and then end up back at home, broke as hell. And it was really stressful. I didn't love it, but I had a lot of great experiences that I value to this day. Like I've done, like multi-month road trips and backpacking trips and all kinds of stuff, even without having very much money. And so the thing that I always kind of debate with myself is like, if you were giving yourself advice, if I was giving myself advice, would I do the same thing, or would I suggest to myself, go get a job? And I think I would do the same thing I did over again. Like I really like where my life has ended up, and I really like a lot of those experiences that I had. But I will say the one thing that I noticed that's different between my experience and the experience of a lot of my peers who I think took a more normal, like / boring path, they ended up quite a bit further ahead in their careers faster. And the reason for it was this is the thing that I didn't realize was like a thing. When you go get a job out of high school or out of college, a lot of the people that you work with there will be lifelong contacts that will pull you into other companies and other opportunities. And I always kind of felt like the way to make your own success was to like go build your own company. And there's an element of truth to that for a certain person, but the much more like repeatable and high likelihood way of navigating towards the career that you want is to be really well networked with other people who kind of think similarly to you. And I missed out on a little bit of that because I spent time kind of just off in a different world, like traveling, backpacking, doing all that stuff. And it just wasn't the same at that point as it is now. I think now it's much easier to find those kinds of like entrepreneurial groups out on the backpacking trail. But there's definitely benefit to just going and getting a job right out of college, even if you want to be an entrepreneur. Like for me, all the best opportunities of my career have come from people that I met as an employee who have just let me know about something that I never would have known about otherwise. Shout out to Steph Smith and Calvin Rosser for that. That's a great example.
That's so cool. Well, and it's funny because even as you say that, this is the advice that I would give to people, but it's like Ray Dalio in that book, Principles. I read that whole entire long book. I can't remember any of it except for one line, which was you can have anything you want, but you can't have everything that you want. And if I look back and I think about would I do it the same, I definitely would. I just wish I would have been a little less anxious about it because I always felt like time is running out. Someone is behind me. Someone's clawing at me. I'm broke next week. I'm going to be on the street again. Like I just always felt like time was running out, and it wasn't, time wasn't running out. I could have slept till 7. Let's just put it that way. Like I could have slept till 7 and maybe even had my coffee and everything would have been fine. So,
well, let me ask you about that. Okay. So I agree with parts of what you're saying here. And now that I'm in my 30s and I look back and I see some of the younger entrepreneurs who are getting into this, one of the things that hits me the hardest, and it's like really unfortunate, are these people who are 21 and 22 and feel like they're out of time. And I see it like on Twitter, people are saying, I'm turning 23 tomorrow. I still haven't built a company. Like, please tell me this is okay. I'm like, you have you have so much time left. So, and I know there are people listening to this who are saying the same thing about me at 32. They're saying like, dude, you have so much time left. Don't worry about it. That's the big thing. You talk about the cruel joke that like the world plays on you. It's that you have way more time than you think. Assuming you don't like screw up and get yourself dead, you have time. Life is long. And I wish more young entrepreneurs knew that, because there really does seem to be like a lot of pain tied up in it. But let me ask you this, and this is the flip side of that knife. Do you think you would have actually made it if you had that mindset?
No, no. It's just my biggest advantage. My mom always called it my gift and my curse. I just cannot help but swim. I don't think sharks die when they stop swimming. First of all, I think that's not true. but but that analogy always applied to me. Like I
But
just
if you're swimming
cannot help.
around sharks and you stop swimming,
Yeah,
you're
well,
gonna die.
exactly. um, no, I think that there is a huge benefit to continuously moving. So I will give you something that is true. If you're not growing, you're dying. It's a universal law.
Hmm.
And I just always felt like I need to be growing. I need to be growing in one way or another. The part about it for me, which was unnecessary, is I would feel very, and still do feel like very, very guilty and very, shame's too strong of a word, but some kind of emotion where like I'm letting myself down, if I wasn't always going all in on something. um I don't know why that is. I think I brought this to you before. I went really, really deep on the cultural aspects of the Protestant work ethic and how that mind frame became part of America, and how Protestants don't see heaven as salvation. They see like the work today as your salvation. And that is really how America became such a leader in the shipping trade, is because when the Silk Road was booming, and all the shipping vessels were going from Southeast Asia with the silk and a lot of the really high end fabrics they had. The Protestants were the only ones that said like, no, I'm not sleeping, I'm going. And so because of that, we always got the jump on. Well, they always got the jump on everybody. And so I think that there's definitely a part of that in me, which just is inherent to my culture and my family and where I come from. Especially, I'm from the Northeast. I grew up in Philadelphia, and like Southeast Pennsylvania is just that to a T.
Mm-hmm.
But even still, like there are plenty of times where I think to myself, like I could let this go right now. Like I could take this little voice out of my head, and maybe I'll just put him over here for like an hour or two. And then when I need him again, I can pick him up and put him back. It's exhausting for sure.
Yeah. That is definitely a skill to be able to flip it on, I think, be
Yeah,
able to
but do you
flip it
know
on.
anybody who can do that? Can you do that?
No, I default to on. And though that was a decision that I made at one point. Like, what's funny is I distinctly remember in high school listening to an interview with this she was like a track runner, and she's like, I'm so self-critical. I'm such a perfectionist. I demand so much of myself.
Yeah.
And when I listened to that, I was like, that's weird that anybody's like that. Like that's so weird that anybody's like that. And then somehow along the way, like that became my life. I maybe not perfectionist, because I tend to be pretty good at like done is better than perfect,
Yeah.
but definitely my own biggest critic. And I've examined that trait a lot, because sometimes it's the source of like a lot of unhappiness. And ultimately I've decided that I would much rather default to workaholism and have to teach myself to relax than the opposite.
Yes. Yes, man, exactly. There are
And by
parts
the
about
way,
it that are uncomfortable, but this is better than the alternative.
to me, at least for my personality trait, because you know what, I don't worry, like, yeah, I struggle to make time for some things that are important. I struggle to like give myself leeway on things. I struggle to be kind to myself with a lot of projects and stuff like that. I don't worry about finding a job ever. It doesn't bother me. I don't worry about losing a job ever. And I think it kind of just comes down to, what do you want to worry about? right?
Mm.
So I'm not, there's some people who would listen to that and they'd think like we're advocating hustle culture. And I'd say that's partly true, but I'm not saying it's not important to know how to relax. It's really important. But if you're going to have to learn something, I would rather have to learn how to relax than have to learn how to work, because one of those just sounds so much more painful, you know?
That's so well put, man. That's so well put. Yeah. That's beautiful. Like it really is. It's like a beautiful concept to come to grips with. And you said balance with me. Ironically, and this actually is ironic because ironic is like the most misused word ever. But ironically, I think one of the things that allows me to come off as balance is that I don't actually believe in balance. I think the whole thing is a complete lie. I think it's unachievable. And I think it's dumb. I think it's like trying to be happy. Like, why would I want to be happy all the time? That sounds so stupid. Like, so what? I'm going to miss out on all of these other emotions just because if I'm not happy, it means I'm failing. Whoever came up with that, it's not true. It's like a myth that peanut butter commercials and like Jiffy Moms choose Jif tricked you into. And the same thing is with balance. Like, I don't want to be balanced. That sounds so boring and stale and like middle ground. I have no desire to have balance. I would much, much, much rather be on the total opposite end of the spectrum and have people saying like, that dude needs to chill. And I'm looking at it like, I think you need something to like be excited about. And so really at the end of the day, I suppose wrapping this whole thing up, like I am so appreciative to have this monkey that is always telling me that I could be doing more or that I could have done something, because the flip side of that is it forces yourself to have just full honesty with yourself. And when I go to bed at night, like I absolutely know every single night that I did everything that I could have done. It's it's great. Like I sleep like a fucking baby every night, dude. I'm out. I got no alarm clock, no one telling me what to do. I don't have to listen to anybody's shit, nothing. And it all comes at a cost of like
You leave
just
it
being
all
a
on the
little high
field.
strung. Yeah.
You reminded me of a favorite quote I just pulled up. This is from one of my favorite all-time books, Travels with Charlie, John Steinbeck. And for people who haven't heard the book, at this point in his life, Steinbeck was rich, he was famous, he was middle-aged, and he had been told that he had a heart problem and needed to slow down, and didn't take too kindly to that. And at this point, he writes, I've always lived violently, drunk hugely, eaten too much or not at all, slept around the clock or missed 2 nights of sleeping, worked too hard and too long in glory, or slobbed for a time in utter laziness. I've lifted, pulled, chopped, climbed, made love with joy, and taken my hangovers as a consequence, not as a punishment. And he goes on to take a trip all the way around America, in spite of that diagnosis. Yeah. So I've always loved the way he wrote about that and this concept that we're talking about, which is that like there's a lot of people out there who will tell you to be balanced or to, that like hustle culture is toxic or something like that. And it's like, yeah, fine, whatever you think, but just do it, like do whatever you think is best when it comes to work for yourself.
Yeah.
Cool, man. This was fun. I came with like a
fun.
whole bunch of stuff, which we're gonna have to save for next week. So
you always come to these things with like a pretty good plan, and you always just show up like, I did no research, I did no preparation. What do you want to talk about?
Yeah. We're gonna have to start doing a second show called like the show after the show or something like that, where we talk about whatever we actually brought to the table.
That's a good idea. Well, damn, great show. I loved it. I needed this too. This was like really, really good timing for me. So thank you for listening and for your kind words. Really appreciate it. I appreciate you. Anything else you got to say?
That's it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Make sure you check out copybloggerpod.com if you want the video details, whatever you want. Yeah. And that's it. We'll see you next week.
Great. Talk to you guys next week. See ya.